Thank you, Tim. Appreciate the opportunity. And for those of you we haven't had a chance to talk before, welcome very much to Lake Resources. I'm going to be talking about something fundamentally different in the battery material supply chain that drives the electrification of mobility. This process doesn't involve mining. It's a clean technology. It's just water treatment. And it's just an adaptation of a very well-known water treatment method called ion exchange, which if you have a water filter in your house or perhaps under your sink, uses a very similar process, but this has just been adapted for lithium extraction. Our technology partner, Lilac Solutions, is an unlisted company in California, and we've been working with them now for a couple of years, looking at an efficient way of lithium separation from this salty water, from brines. We've demonstrated through a pre-feasibility study that it's cost competitive versus traditional processes. Our technology partner is backed by the Bill Gates-led Breakthrough Energy Fund, MIT's The Engine Fund. There's some very heavy hitters who've made a lot of money backing new disruptive technologies. And best of all, we produce a high purity product. Now, as the industry develops and we see more and more demand for batteries as there's more and more demand for electric vehicles, this focus on high purity lithium will really become a theme. And it has two aspects. First of all, if you have a high purity product, it can go into cathodes and batteries rather than getting reprocessed. And the second part of that is that it immediately means you get a premium price. On top of what I've just mentioned, by using this water extraction process, we end up with a very small environmental footprint. These salt lakes look like what you might see in Western Australia, or if you've been to the US, what Death Valley looks like in California. The difference is the salt water has lithium dissolved in it, underneath the ground. We pump it up from underneath the ground, and the traditional method is it sits in an evaporation pond. We use this direct extraction process. We take the lithium out in the space of a couple of hours and we return that water back to its source. So it's responsibly sourced and sustainable. Anything new naturally needs a significant amount of testing. We've spent more than 18 months now lab testing and nearly 6 months at a pilot scale, and we'll be releasing some results in that in the very near future. Next slide, please. So why lithium? Some of you may have invested in lithium in the past. It had a price run back in 2017. It's been fairly quiet, fairly flat in pricing, particularly on spot going into China over the last 9 to 18 months. But as we look forward, the demand for lithium is really quite spectacular. Up until Tesla's battery day, we were looking about 5 to 8 times growth over the next 8 to 10 years. Now that's looking like doubling. The EU has come up with a major piece on this. And if we just look at the mega factories, we've gone from having 3 to 158 in 5 years. That has to be fed. That's got to be fed by new supply. Yet there hasn't been the investment in new supply. And it's going to particularly want new supply, which is more sustainable. Next slide, please. So what does this process look like? As I said, it's a newer adaptation of known technology. It's efficient. We do it in the space of a couple of hours instead of 9 or 18 months. It doesn't involve evaporation, so we return the water back to its source. It's faster. It produces much higher recoveries, and best of all, a high purity product that's cost competitive and much more environmentally sensitive. Next slide, please. So this is a quick graphic showing what it looks like. What we essentially do is replace the evaporation pond with a tank. The tank, or what we call a module, they stand a few meters tall, a couple of meters wide. And at full production, we would have 50 or 60 of these. The water gets pumped into these tanks. Inside it sits these ion exchange beads. They're about half the size of rice grains. They work very quickly to attach themselves to all the lithium. Doesn't involve chemicals. It's an ionic bond. That allows us to release that water back to its source. That's about 99% of it. So we capture that 1% that's lithium. And because you're taking the lithium out, you immediately produce a high purity product, which is heavily concentrated. And then we use a standard process to turn it into lithium carbonate. Next slide, please. To give you an idea graphically what that looks like on the ground, In the top left-hand corner, these are the evaporation ponds in the north of Atacama. We could be in the north of Argentina. And so you've got 5, 10, 15, 20 square kilometres of evaporation ponds going out over the horizon. All we're in Western Australia with traditional hard rock mining. It looks like an open pit, perhaps a little smaller than others, more like gold mining than coal mining, but we have a hole in the ground versus what we're talking about. We're talking about the physical footprint of a city block or two and being able to re-inject everything back into its source. So physically has a much smaller footprint. We return the water back to where it comes from in a hyper-arid environment, so that's good for communities. Next slide, please. So given that, so let's talk about where we're located. The large projects for lithium brines are in the north of Chile, the north of Argentina. And we're right in the middle of that. You would have heard this phrase called the Lithium Triangle. Down the bottom of the screen, you see our flagship project, Kachi, and further north, we also have projects right alongside current production by Orocobre and production that's coming on stream next year by Gengfang together with Lithium Americas. All of the 5 big producers are here, and many of them are also in Western Australia. Next slide, please. So what does this project look like? We've got a major resource at the moment, 4.4 million tonnes lithium carbonate equivalent. That could easily be significantly larger. It's just a matter of actually drilling. We've found that it's open at depth. It's certainly open laterally. We've got a very large holding, 70,000 hectares of leases. Just to give you an idea, that's 11 times the size of Manhattan Island. If we were in Sydney, that's about a third of the entire Sydney basin, pretty much anything from the Hills District through the Shire and all of the eastern suburbs. And out of that current 4.4 million tonne total resource, the pre-feasibility study we did for 25 years of production at 25,000 tonnes per annum only uses 20% of that resource. That's because we've got a much higher recovery and so therefore you're utilising the resource efficiently. I want to emphasise this isn't about grade. It's not about having the highest grade brine. It's about having a clean brine that you can process it. This is about industrial chemistry, and one of the reasons why the Kachi Project works. Next slide, please. At the end of the day, it's low impurities. So where do we end up on the cost curve? We end up on the left-hand side down in the grey space. That's where the lithium brine producers are. Our PFS showed about $4,100 a tonne. We'll probably get that down a little bit less. And then you see that coloured band above it. That's the sort of price range. If you have a low quality project, what we call technical or industrial grade, you might only be getting $5,000, $6,000 a tonne for that. But if you have a premium product, you're getting $8,500 to $11,000 a tonne right now when prices are flat and they look to be moving upwards. Next slide, please. So in the next few days, we'll be releasing some more results about all of the work we've been doing now for many months with our pilot plant and getting that processed into lithium carbonate. And you can reasonably expect that to be positive, although I'm in a blackout period at the moment. What we're going to do next, though, is something also different. We're going to be putting that straight into a battery, a 622 battery, with the help of Novonix. Novonix is a standout company. They've been state-of-the-art on battery testing now for 8 or 9 years, led by Dr. Jeff Dahn at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, Canada. And they've also been developing their own work on anodes and cathodes. It's great that we can provide a new age, high-quality product into that and demonstrate that it works in a battery as well. Next slide, please. So production timeline. We aim to have our detailed feasibility study, which is initiated, environmental study, some of the work on site, and a pilot plant operating on site. We have a pilot plant in California at the moment, but one operating on site. We aim to have all of those finished by mid next year or this date next year, move straight through into construction finance, and then aiming for production early 2023. And that 2023 is pretty much seen as the inflection point for pricing uplift in this sector. Next slide, please. So who are we? Nearly 800 million shares on issue, around a 50 million market cap. We have had a little bit of a lift like other lithium companies, and you can expect more to come. $3 million in the bank at the end of September and more. And And we'll be probably adding some debt to that to ensure financing. Next slide, please. Just in comparison, one other direct extraction company is called Standard Lithium. They're on the TSX. They've also had a significant uplift, much more than Lake. They're really the only other competitor that's got a significant direct extraction process. And up the road from us, Lithium Americas have also had a price rise. Look, we're still only trading about 4% NPV. Some of our peers much more than that. So there's plenty of room. And last slide, please. So in summary, a new clean technology producing a high purity product. This is a 21st century solution to a 21st century demand, and best of all, produced responsibly and at a cost competitive price. So over to questions.
Thank you, Steve. Can you just confirm, I think you may have touched on, Hazen is currently confirming the quality of your lithium carbonate. This is a big question, obviously. It's taking a little bit longer than expected. Can you talk to how that is progressing?
Yes, I can only talk about what is already public. We have said that we anticipate being able to announce those results about now. We anticipate that in the coming days. We have had to do some cross-checking just to ensure that those results can be reported in an appropriate way. I'm waiting for sign-off on all of that. But we have always expected that the Hazen results would be positive because the quality of the liquid going in there from the lilac pilot plant modules is as good, if not better, than what we saw at benchtop. And because the transformation process into lithium carbonate is relatively straightforward, we have said for some time we expect them to be high quality.
And another question that's got quite a few, obviously. So total lithium demand we know is going to increase by roughly 8 times out of 2030. China currently controls the global supply. And then you've got the kind of the US and Europe are seeking to localize supplies away from China. What does this mean for Lake?
Well, we're actually extremely well positioned in that particular scenario because the EU wants to see responsibly sourced supply. And so they've actually been leading the pack. Volkswagen, Daimler, BMW, and to a lesser extent Tesla, looking for responsibly sourced products. And they also want high quality. At the moment, it doesn't really matter where your lithium comes from. It tends to get either reprocessed or converted into batteries or cathodes in China. And they're also looking at doing that. We're extremely well priced because when you've got new providers, you've got to have your material tested. We're getting that tested in a battery, and we're doing it in a cost competitive way at high purity, and that's more sustainable.
Understood. A question here, how will the company secure the 700 million Opex for construction?
Yeah, so 540 million US is what we've got in the pre-feasibility study. And the discussions we've had to date have been primarily with export credit agencies out of EU, UK, US. They have been very favourably predisposed to fund the lion's share of that. And I have to say, in my more than 30 years in various parts of the industry, this is the first time I've seen that sort of interest in getting this funded. And that's because it's new energy and we've got a benefit there around quality and more sustainable. What we're just trying to do is make certain that we have the right funding structure to get us through the next 12, 18 months so that we can then have that refinanced through the first tranche of the construction finance.
Thanks, Steve. A couple more. As lithium is normally more expensive to produce from brines rather than hard rock, can you explain why the Lilac Solutions technology you plan to use will give your brine the edge?
Yes, so the problem we have with hard rock is it has to get reprocessed. We don't actually produce lithium in Australia. We just produce a concentrate of spodumene, which then gets shipped up to China to then get converted into lithium hydroxide. We are in the process of building some lithium hydroxide plants in Australia. The difference here is you're actually producing a saleable product on site, lithium carbonate, and we're looking at other ways of producing a saleable product of lithium hydroxide as well. And so if you look at the all-in cost, it's actually quite cost competitive on the one hand. But the second thing I want to reiterate, if you're producing a really chemical quality, high purity sample, it gets a premium price. And that's how we separate ourselves out from everybody else. much higher margin.
And so how quickly can you kind of ramp up commercial production?
As I mentioned, we aim to have our studies and be well advanced in discussions with construction finance by mid to late next year, certainly by this date next year. And we aim to be in production in early 2023 for that real kick up in demand.
And why aren't more companies using your extraction refining process?
Well, that's an excellent question, Tim. The real answer to that is simply this. We've been doing something new. New means you've got to do the effort. You've got to put the work in to show how it works. Even just 12 months ago, people were saying, this can't be right. Why don't you just use the same method that everybody else is doing? I go, why? We need a 21st century solution with consistent, high quality product. You look at some of the brine producers at the moment, they're still producing an industrial quality product, which is at a low price. We can produce consistently battery quality and get a high margin and still be producing at the same price. So that's why we're focused on that, but it's going to take a while for others to pick that up.